Quick Take. I'm your host, Susie Tomanchuk, along with my favorite co-host, James Capps. How are you, James?
I am super, super happy to be here.
Oh, me too. And, I said last time we don't need to say last names, and I do it every time.
You
So
know
there
what?
you go. We're
That's
not.
okay. I'm excited to hear how you pronounce it every time too. So sometimes you
Oh,
don't get
do
it
I
right.
do it wrong? Yeah.
No, no,
Interesting.
you do it right
Okay.
every time. But now I got it in your head.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. It is actually a good transition as we think about what are the elephants in the room.
Hmm.
So let me tell you what I mean is
Okay, bring me home. Bring it around.
bring it around for you. So here's an example. So I work with a lot of organizations on a retainer, and sometimes I work with like the director level group, and it's a closed room. I get feedback about what it feels like to be a direct report of some of their VPs of their leaders. And what these directors have told me is one of the VPs never listens, like
Right.
goes on a staff meeting and on and on and on and on. So guess what? I meet with the VPs and I ask them about how often do they listen. And this specific VP will just every time says, that's all I do is listen.
Right. Right. Right.
That's all I do.
Yeah.
All I do is listen. But then I meet with them again. They're like, all he does is talk.
Right. Yeah. Those are really frustrating situations because people, and to your point, they're the worst kept secrets. Right.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that particular VP doesn't listen. And as a leader, you're working at that surface level where the working surface, you're trying to help that leader. But as an executive and as a manager of that group, your job is to identify where those elephants are.
Yeah.
Look at the situation and start to break those down, because a highly effective team, I mean, truly effective teams are the teams that are working, at 100% across the board, running together all in the same direction. They need to have that transparency. They need to have that trust. And those elephants in the room, those unspoken secrets, those topics that are avoided, they're insidious. They will corrode that effectiveness faster than almost anything.
And I think it's the transparency. I know you're going to give us some tips, but also if just because you say it once, because I know this guy has heard it once,
Right.
doesn't mean that it's going to click for them.
No,
And they have to understand the impact of it. What impact is it having on individuals?
Well, and I think the entire premise of addressing that topic is addressing it in a very constructive way, in a long-term fashion, and at a cultural level. Because you can't simply tell somebody, listen better, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's consciously or even subconsciously, thinking, I want to be a bad listener. So it is much more complex than that. And that's why people like you and I are brought in to companies, because it is not as simple as, handing out note cards, reminding people to, be effective leaders and listen well. I mean, if it was that easy, this world would have a lot fewer problems. So the truth is it's a complex solution to a difficult problem.
Yeah. So what are your tips?
Well, I think, in your situation, it's a great indicator that somebody has identified the issue. And I think as leaders, it's much more difficult oftentimes to identify where your team is dancing around a particular issue. But your job, and my first tip, is you have to look for the warning signs. If you have an organization that arguably everybody's really getting along and the leader of that team is saying we're doing really well and they all love me, but they're missing their schedules. They're having high attrition. People are looking for jobs in other parts of the organization. Those warning signs are telling you something else is going on. I often like to think that if there's something weird happening and it doesn't seem possible based on the information I have, I don't have all the information. And so, you have to first look for the warning signs because they're there. And more often than not, those warning signs are not as directly tied to the 800-pound gorilla, but with a little bit of investigation, you can get there.
I think that's really great. And I think it reminds me of the fact that we believe feedback comes just from people, but feedback comes from understanding what it's like to live outside of you. And sometimes those warning signs can be, you're not invited to the meeting, you're not brought in and trusted
Hmm.
about some information. But like you said, as a leader, those are harder because why am I not getting this information from the team? And maybe it
Hmm.
is because you're not giving them the space to be able to articulate that. So sometimes being our own observer and looking about what's happening around us is really important, especially as a leader, to take
Yep.
that time.
Yep. You absolutely do. And I think that, that leads well into my second one, which is, at the end of the day, leaders are all humans, and you are going to feel some discomfort in having this conversation.
Yeah.
And so, you know, oftentimes, I was working with a CEO who was involved in a merger, and he was concerned that talking about that merger would cause panic within the team. And so, but what he decided to do was he came to the realization, that this merger is out there, it's in the public domains, and so he had no choice but to address it, because when he ignored it, it was actually causing more problems. And so,
Mm-hmm.
when he brought the team around, they were actually able to increase the communication in the company and actually get the entire company rallied around the situation versus everybody being scared of it. And I think that type of willingness to take a risk from a leader perspective is huge, and an indicator of somebody who's really prepared to do what is necessary.
Yeah. And what really struck me when I really understood that our blind spots are just that we
Hmm.
can't live outside of us. We
Right.
can't. So we need to be open to
Hmm.
hearing what it's like to live outside of us
Yeah,
because that's unavailable to us.
totally agree. There's a great article written by Dina Denham Smith, came out a couple months ago, and she said that 85% of employees withhold voicing important issues with their superiors.
Wow.
85%. So if you're listening to me today, listening to
Wow.
this podcast, and you breathe, and if our audience, all of
Yeah.
those of you who are actually, working with other people, I'm pretty sure that there's something in the room that's not getting talked about.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, every one of our listeners are working with an organization that has something on the table that they're not addressing. So
Yeah.
it's not if that happens, it's about it's that it's happening and being willing to
Right.
take the steps.
Yes, I love that there is something for you to uncover about
Right.
you.
Right.
So go
Or
look
you,
for that.
or any number. It could be somebody in your staff.
Yeah.
It's people are avoiding that vice president's meetings, they're not attending. They're trying to transfer out of that group. Any number of things are indicators, and you've got to be willing as a leader to talk about them.
Yeah. I've just been doing some 360 questions with direct reports of some leaders. And one of the questions is, how does your action impact me? Does it
Oh, wow.
motivate you? Does it move you? So those are some questions that leaders can ask to understand the impact that they're having on their people.
Right.
Instead of asking directly for feedback, just
Yeah.
say, how am I motivating you?
Right. And I think that's a great way. That's a great segue into my third one, which is you have to deal with the culture problem, right? And so this 360, those questions, you have to instill a culture of candor and trust in an
Yeah.
organization. You have to get people not only to give feedback, but to be, you have to also instill the emotional intelligence into your leaders, so they know how to ask for feedback in a way that's constructive, and then to
Yep.
respond to it in a way that's constructive. So
Totally.
look, if your entire situation is that there is this 800-pound gorilla, you can slay that gorilla. What's poor gorillas here? They get a bad rap on this. But that's just one indicator. You have a culture issue, right?
Yeah.
So you uncover the one problem. You realize that nobody likes to work with this vice president, and you move them on to another department. They go to another company. The truth is, you still have a cultural issue in which that your team chose not to bring that forward.
Yeah.
So you have to go the next step. You can't just fix the problem. You're not fixing the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. And you've got to
Yes.
go look at the culture part.
Yep. Don't forget that self-awareness goes up as you go up in the organization. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness goes down
It's
as you go up
down.
in the organization
Yep.
because people learn how open you are to feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not showing that you're a good recipient, you
Yep.
understand it, you even show, listen, I got this feedback. I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to lead this meeting. I'm going to really
Right.
listen and ask questions. Like even signaling to people that you
Mm-hmm.
heard it so that they can start taking that feedback in the same way. You're teaching them
That's right.
how to accept and utilize feedback that you're given and that you're open to it.
Yeah, one of the biggest culture creators in an organization is parroting. When people
Yeah,
emulate the way that you behave, your leaders will respond to feedback how you
exactly.
respond to feedback. And so, if you want to change a culture, you want to drive a culture, you have to behave in such a fashion that that it does change the culture. I've worked with many organizations, as I know you have as well, where the leader is of a certain personality. And despite many, many intentions, it's nearly impossible to get the culture of the organization to be radically different than the approach of that leader. And
Yeah.
so, no matter what, that culture is going to be driven by the top. And if you're going to create a culture of openness, you've got to walk the walk.
Yeah. And so here's another piece of evidence if you're listening and you're breathing and listening to this is if your people are not good at accepting feedback,
Mm-hmm.
that might be a reflection of you.
Of you. That's right. Then you have to ask yourself, am I good at that? That's a
Yeah.
great. Oh my gosh, that's so good. I love that. I'm going to use that with some of my other companies. That the truth is that yeah, that's a really simple way to test
Yeah.
your willingness to be open, because it's pretty rare that the group is so radically different.
Yeah. That was such a brilliant comment, Susie, is what I
Susie, that
heard you
was such a
say.
good comment.
I
I'm
know.
going to use that. I'm going to use that in the forward of my book.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. All right. What are your 3 tips, James? Bring it
My
home.
first one is look for the warning signs. There are indicators that you have an unspoken truth in the room, and they are obvious. The warning signs are obvious, and if you take a look at them, you'll usually find that there's a problem. The second thing is be willing to lean in and take the risk and have the conversation. Odds are very good that your willingness and ability to tackle the situation will be well received. And as a leader, it's your responsibility. They're looking to you to address that situation, even if they're not vocalizing it. And then thirdly, realize that unspoken truth, that 800-pound gorilla is a symptom of a cultural
Yeah.
issue. And you need to continue to work and address the mores and the way that the team behaves that precluded them from actually bringing this to your attention. So always work on the culture as a foundation of this, because I think it's really the thing that helps us be a long-term solution versus a tactical fix.
Yeah. As you said, this is an important podcast for people to listen to. So if you know somebody that's breathing and is in leadership, they probably
Right.
need to hear
Every
this
leader
too.
needs this to realize that every leader is struggling with this to some degree.
Yeah.
And so it's an important one to talk about.
Thanks, James.